Joining me now is the aforementioned Roger McNamee. He's the co-founder of Elevation Partners. As I said, he's an early investor in Google and Facebook. He is the author of the best-selling and important book, Zucked, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe, and he's an advisor for the group Stop Hate for Profit, a great friend to our show. Roger, good to see you again. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Always a pleasure, Ali.
People like you and me who dwell in this world, journalists, politicians, some celebrities, are all lamenting the idea that Musk is wrecking Twitter. Is it necessarily a bad thing that he's wrecking Twitter? Is it a bad thing that Twitter might actually disappear or sort of collapse?
Ali, I think if Twitter actually disappeared completely, that probably would be a good thing for democracy. It'd probably be a good thing for public health and public safety. I think that's the least likely outcome. I think what Musk is doing is he's killing Twitter as we know it. And the reason that matters is that Twitter, while only maybe less than 10% the size of Facebook, less than a quarter the size of Instagram, it punches above its weight because it's the platform that politicians, journalists, and celebrities use. And so it has a disproportionate influence on our political conversations and on how people understand news. What Musk is doing is he's essentially going in and imposing his worldview. He's made the thing into a soap opera with himself as the lead character. And in the process, he's drawn an enormous amount of attention for himself, which is, I think, the goal here. And he's doing it by basically just thumbing his nose at what was the Twitter establishment. And, you know, the harm of this is much less in what happens on Twitter than what happens with the data and who gets to control voices in this country. Because Twitter is a platform that's been open to all kinds of voices that are normally suppressed, even in a democracy. And those voices are being harmed here.
So that's actually a point that people across the political spectrum share, right? That voices should be given platforms. The problem is some of those voices are, as you said, generally, traditionally underrepresented, are not otherwise out there. And some of them are underrepresented for good reason because they spread hate and disinformation. Elon Musk's conception of First Amendment and freedom of speech seems to be a little misguided here. What's the right way to look at how you give voice to people who otherwise don't have voice in this country?
So, Ali, the key problem here is that advertising is what drives Twitter's business. And in order to drive advertising, you have to keep people's attention. Not all content is equally great at grabbing attention. In fact, it turns out that hate speech and disinformation and conspiracy theories are unusually good at commanding attention because it triggers people's flight or fight reflex. And so in Musk's concept, he overlays his own personal viewpoint of free speech, which is essentially anyone who agrees with him gets free speech, and everyone else, well, they aren't entitled to the same rights. And so you overlay that onto the advertising model of Twitter, and you get a stew of really harmful speech overwhelming everybody else. And that's exactly what's going on right now.
So Elon Musk's response to that in a tweet from November 18th is that new Twitter policy is freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. Negative hate tweets will be max deboosted and demonetized, so no ads or other revenue to Twitter. You won't find the tweet unless you specifically seek it out, which is no different from the rest of the internet. But then he says, by the way, this applies only to the individual tweet, not to the whole account. Does that give you any comfort?
Not in the least. And the reason is because the way the advertising works on Twitter, his point about things being demonetized is just nonsense. That is not what's going to happen. And so the other thing about Musk is you cannot take him at his word. He constantly says things and then reverses course days, weeks, months later. And so I think what you have to do is look at his actions. And he quite clearly is doing things that promote far-right speech over other kinds of speech. And again, that is his right. The problem that we have here, Ali, is that we have essentially turned over the biggest communications systems in our country, and effectively the places where democracy takes place, to a handful of billionaires whose personal politics and personal ambitions are at odds with democracy. And we see this right now all over the place, right? It's going on at Facebook, it's going on at Twitter, and you look at this and you say to yourself, how does democracy go forward in an environment where a handful of people who don't believe in it control the platforms where democracy takes place.
So to the Donald Trump, and there are many other people other than Donald Trump who have had their accounts reinstated, people who have had them out of commission since post-January 6th. There was a very specific and important reason why some of these accounts were decommissioned at that point, and that's because they were involved in what appeared to be an insurrection against the United States government. Now Donald Trump's a candidate for president. 52% of that poll, I have no idea statistically who was involved in that poll on Twitter and how scientific it was, said that they wanted Donald Trump back, and that was the basis ostensibly for Elon Musk's decision. Does that make sense? Should Donald Trump be back on Twitter? Is there some reason that he shouldn't be that's clear to you?
So, Ali, the thing I do not understand is how someone who incited an insurrection remains free at large and eligible to run for president of the United States. The issues here go so far beyond Twitter. We essentially have evolved in this country a system where billionaires are not held accountable to the same rules as everyone else. That applies to Trump, it applies to Musk, it applies to many other billionaires. And I look at this and think to myself, in a democracy, that's not how it's supposed to work. And I think we're seeing failures at the government level. I think we're seeing failures at the regulatory level. And I think, frankly, we as citizens are failing to make ourselves heard. We're acting as though we don't have a role in this conversation, that we're passive observers. And in my experience, democracies only work when we all recognize that we have agency and that it's our job to stand up for the things we believe in.
You joining any of these other alternative platforms?
Well, I've been sampling a whole bunch of them. I've been on Mastodon and on Post. And, you know, what I can say is that they are not what Twitter is. Twitter is a unique thing. And whether you like it or hate it, Twitter has become very important to a lot of people. And I don't think the Twitter that we've liked, which has never been perfect, is going to survive Musk's leadership. Now, I don't see anything coming along that's going to replace it in exactly the same way. And the things that are there now are so small that, particularly for celebrities and politicians, they don't serve the immediate need that those communities have. But at the other side of this is I'm not sure that that need that they have is one that democracy
That's the brilliant point. Maybe just something we didn't need, right? Like when I discovered I couldn't eat gluten, I found gluten-free desserts. I'm like, maybe I just didn't need to eat dessert because now I eat too much of that stuff. Roger, thanks, buddy. Always good to see you. I'm also, by the way, sampling some of these new ones. I just opened a Mastodon account, and I'm going to try and figure out how to get on Post. But good to see you as always. Roger McNamee is a co-founder of Elevation Partners.
We're going to spend time on them that we should probably spend
doing something else. Right. Yeah. Spend another 20 minutes in the gym as opposed to that. Roger's a co-founder of Elevation Partners and advisor for the group Stop Hate for Profit. He's the author of if you haven't read it, it's such an important book, Zucked, Waking Up to the Facebook Catastrophe.